I'm gonna get started here and get rid of my banner. So welcome to my live stream audience and to Marvin, Carolina, to Stop Planning, Start Drafting. I cooked up this presentation over the course of like 3 days, so if there are any typos or anything weird in there, please forgive me. I'm just going to jump right into it with the things that we will be learning today, starting with how to craft an outline. You have had some experience working with me doing that. We're going to go through some more specifics a little bit later on. Creating compelling and complete story arcs. So this will apply more to genre type fiction, more to things that are with fictional characters, or even historical sort of counts or biographies, and how to bring out the arc within those stories. How to fully develop characters, same thing. When to find the time to write, as we know, is a very widespread common struggle.
Yes.
What to do with your first draft once you are done completing it. So that will be the last thing that we go over, is sort of where to take your draft once you've gotten started. Preparation is key. So getting that outline together, as you know, helps you to build your roadmap, helps you to know what you need to be doing moving forward. So your outline is your course. You're plotting your course, you're preparing for your trip, you're preparing for your journey, and you are making sure that you have a clear line of sight to your objective. You can use your outline to maximize efficiency and lean on it when you're feeling stuck. So the more thorough your outline, the less thinking you're going to have to do when you get to drafting, because you already know where you're going and what you want to do next. And then when you have stuck spots or writer's block, which is what a lot of people think stuck spots are, you are able to look at your map and say, oh wait, I can get back on course. Keeping it relevant. Make sure that whenever you're working on your outline, you are sticking to things that matter to your overall arc. Those are your character arcs and your story arcs. You can see when you look at your outline how each scene or chapter adds to your overall plot. Update your outline as you go. So as you come up with new ideas, or if you decide you want to take your plot in a new direction, make sure you add the changes to your outline so that you are aware of any updates that you have made. That way you're not looking at your manuscript and looking at your outline, getting confused and not seeing where your parallels were. Yes, Marvin?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Okay. You're writing your outline.
Yes.
And you start changing. I gotta kind of write this is kind of what I want to do. And then you start writing some of the other stuff and you start changing. I mean, it changes, maybe just for me. I've changed a lot. I mean, the information, the content is probably basically the same, but how I'm going about it changes. Do I go back and start over? Can I make adjustments on the fly? I mean, how does that?
Make adjustments on the fly. Whatever you've rearranged, what you can do in Microsoft Word is highlight that section of text and drag it and drop it somewhere else. If you've changed the way that you're presenting that information, just go in with your virtual whiteout and rewrite your little piece of your outline.
Yeah.
And then you can see, so think of it like a map. So when you are driving, let's say that, like in my book, I talk about having the map from AAA, right?
Yes.
And so what they did for us for our trip was they highlighted with like a yellow highlighter our plot from California to Florida. And so what we did if we were ever going to take a detour was take our highlighter and then just highlight the new route, so that we knew how to get back on the highway from where we were going. Like we stopped off at the Alamo and the Wax Museum. We stopped off at like Tombstone. These things weren't on our actual route, obviously on the highway. Or like when we took, a side road to get to a hotel, we'd highlight where we were going, and then we'd highlight the way to get back so that we knew where to go in the morning.
Yeah.
Does that track? Does the metaphor track for you?
Yes. So I'm going from LA to Miami. And I want to go through Arizona, and then all of a sudden I want to go to Yellowstone. Yellowstone's way out of the way.
Yes, it is.
And it's not something that I can just kind of go and jump back on, I-10 or I-20 coming across the country. And so that's kind of my thing sometimes. But as I start driving or as I start writing,
I'm sorry. Give me a second.
Yeah. And so as I start doing it, it just seems like, oh, this was good. And I get other information that I hadn't thought of in my outline. I mean, some good nuggets.
Yeah.
And then I say, oh, I'm gonna go way over here. And then I have to either start a whole new map from where I am now, or try to get back to my original map, and that's where.
So are you still going to Miami? That's the question. So if you're in LA and you're originally going to Miami, but now you want to go to Yellowstone, are you still going to try to find your way to Miami, or is your trip now to Yellowstone? And that's the difference. Because if it's a different trip, then you're going to want a different outline. You want a different map.
And that's what where I think I am. I think I still, the trip is different. Is it a direct trip, or is it a sightseeing trip? I think I started out as a direct trip. I'm just trying to get to Miami. Now I want to stop really for a few days in a few places, which wasn't my original plan.
So you need to add more days to your trip. You need to call the office and make some arrangements so you can be gone longer.
And so that's what I'm trying to figure out. So it's just trying to work through that outline and just write that kind of shifts it.
Let's talk about that this afternoon. I don't want to keep you from your obligation, but let's talk about that because I see what you're saying. I can help you.
Okay.
I can help you add your sites.
All right.
This sort of goes into the same take notes as you draft category. As you start to write your manuscript, as you go on your trip, make sure that you are noting where you're going, where you've been, and how you can get sort of back to your destination on the way. And there's nothing wrong with changing things as you go or making updates to your outline. Just make sure that you know where your plot is and how you're going to be able to progress forward. And like Marvin said, if you're wanting to take a whole new trip now, and no longer are you just going from California to Miami, but you're going from California to Yellowstone, maybe to New York or wherever you're going, make sure that you add those pieces to your map so that you're able to get back on track once you're done. Compelling arcs matter. It does matter if you have an interesting plot. Even though a lot of the time I will drone on and on and on about how much narrative voice matters in your story, having an interesting plot does matter. It's not irrelevant. Having an interesting journey is important as well. So plot and character development can make or break your story. Whenever you're writing genre fiction, whenever you're doing anything that is sort of taking your readers on a journey or on a quest, having those arcs is important. It's one of the most important things, I would argue, aside from maybe narrative voice. But the difference between plot and narrative voice is that plotting and character development, these are all things that can be learned, while narrative voice is something that has to be discovered. And so early on in your writing career, you're going to be leaning a lot on plots and character arcs. Add plot points and major character development to your outline. Your character learned a lesson in this chapter. Guess what? That needs to be in your outline so that you remember where it happened and why it happened and what exactly she needs to remember from the event. Keep it simple. So as you get into more and more writing, you're going to be tempted to mimic what you've seen other authors do. A lot of authors do write stories or tell stories from multiple points of view. However, for your first book, I implore you to just write one. The reason why is it's much simpler to keep track of a plot from just one character's perspective. And the other reason is that it's when you don't have a super strong narrative voice, you don't really have a distinctive voice between your narration and your characters, and writing from multiple POV is going to feel sort of stagnant or plateaued. Don't write static main characters. Characters should grow and be visibly changed by story's end. And I will get into a few ways to do that as we get further on into the presentation, but it is important that your character starts being or existing one way and then having learned something or changed somehow along the way. So Marvin, this is relevant to your book because you're writing a story of yourself and starting with what you knew then and what you know now, and how that's changed you as a person. So even as a biography or an autobiography, this is still relevant because people change, and character arcs are not just something that exists in fiction, they're something that exists in real life. We change and we grow. Well, we're supposed to anyway. So we hope that your characters do as well. Tie your storylines together. So as your arcs come along, as things progress through your story, it's going to be very tempting to add in little side stories here and there. But what matters is that your stories all converge at the end to come together and tell one greater story. Again, Marvin, this matters. In your book, you're sort of picking a theme. I actually just posted a blog on theme. And I can send you a link if you want to see it. But theme, that's what your theme is going to be, and everything will sort of come to one point at the end of your book. Keep an eye on your tropes. If you're not familiar with common tropes in writing, you can find many lists. I'll go over some of the common ones here. But there's actually a specific trope, now that I'm thinking about it, for muddying your plot with unnecessary side stories or incomplete side stories. We call it What Happened to the Mouse. I do not remember which book this originated from, but there's a conflict that's introduced in the plot with a mouse character. It's probably like Kate DiCamillo or E.B. White or something. And by the end of the book, the mouse has been forgotten. So you have this conflict that's introduced, and then you never find out what happened. What happened to the mouse? So make sure you tie everything together, and then keep an eye on your tropes. Tropes are useful tools, but poorly executed or executed without style, they can hurt your story. And like I said, we'll get into a little more detail with that in a moment. Writers make time. This is something that I've had to discuss with literally every coaching client I've had. So every single person that I have ever talked to about writing a book has said, I would love to do that, I just don't have the time. Nobody has time to write. It is time that you make and set aside for yourself. When you make writing a priority, you can write a book. No writer, no author, no blogger, no vlogger, nobody just has time. They have chosen writing to do above something else. Set aside at least 10 minutes every day to work on your book. This can be the outline, research, stuck spots, or actual drafting. So as you get into writing, you will find that not every day you spend on writing is spent on the actual draft itself, and that's fine. And you don't have to spend an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours or however much time Stephen King has told you that you need to spend working on your book, actually working on your book. You can work on your book for 10 to 15 minutes a day and still have plenty of time to write a full and complete draft. So 10 minutes after your workout in the morning, 10 minutes after you get home from work. Create attainable goals, adjust as you go, and stick to it. So an attainable goal would be 10 to 15 minutes. Say you've been falling behind on your writing and it's time for you to stick to it. Create an attainable goal. I know I can write 20 words. I know I can write today for 10 or 15 minutes. Make that a priority and sit down and write for those 10 minutes. Now, as you go along, if you find that you have suddenly 20 or 30 minutes a day when you're writing, up your goal to 20 or 30 minutes a day. You can make changes as you go, but make sure that whatever goals you've set for yourself, that you are honoring those and that you are honoring your writing time. Respect your writing time. A lot of times I think that we put aside whatever writing goals that we have in favor of going out with some friends on Friday night, or going to the bar, or going out to dinner, or maybe just scrolling through Facebook, or sitting and binge watching a TV show. Respect your writing time. So when 5:30 in the morning rolls around and you think, oh, I would really love to sleep for that extra 10 minutes. Put that out of your mind, because you have a goal that you've set for yourself, and you're trying to complete something, you're trying to create something and build something. It's just like going to the gym or going to work or starting a new business. Put your time, put your effort into it, and you will find that your 10 to 15 minutes a day, if you respect your writing time, will turn into a full book very quickly. Drafting is only an early step in the writing process. A first draft is not a completed book, despite what you may feel when you are done with it, or despite what other people may have said about their books, or what people published on Amazon KDP have done. We think of drafting as sort of a step one, but when you consider conception and outlining, it becomes more of a step 3. Conception is the idea that you have, outlining, building your plot, making your roadmap, and then drafting. So when you sit down and write the actual rough of your book, that's a technical step 1, but in reality we know that's actually a step 3, and that is step 3 of many. There are several testing and editing steps that come before publishing. So when you get that first draft done and you think, oh boy, I'm so glad I'm finished with that book, you are not finished with that book. There's a few things that you can and should do before you slap that book up online somewhere, before you order prints of your book. There's a few steps that you should take before you decide that you're done writing it. Consider whether you'd like to self-publish or traditionally publish your book. This is something that I hear a lot of debate about, and I get asked about a lot. Do you think self-publishing is better, or that traditionally publishing is better? And honestly, both of them have their ups and downs. Both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. I'll get a little bit more into that later on. It really just depends on what it is that you are trying to accomplish when you publish your book, when you're finished with your book. Now we're going to get out of the introduction here and get into outlining. So I'm going to teach you guys a few ways to effectively outline your book so that you maximize your efficiency and get your book finally written. Gather your ideas. At this point in time, if you have a notebook full of notions or ideas or thoughts, things that you would like to turn into a book, even if it's just a one sentence that you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm ready to write this down. Gather your ideas, and we're going to put them together today. So an idea or conception might look like one of the following. It would be funny if. How many times have you said to someone, oh, it would be funny if someone looked at us right now? It would be funny if, one of the things I used to say to my sisters when we were growing up was, wouldn't it be funny if our life was a television show and this was the moment that someone chose to tune in and see what we were doing? Wouldn't that be funny? Or wouldn't it be funny if every red car in the world was driven by a man named Steve? So you just know when someone pulls up that there's a man named Steve inside the car. So these are things that sometimes they pop up all over the internet as writing prompts, someone who's had this idea but who's not really wanting to turn it into a book, so they just sort of put the idea out there. So that would be a potential idea or conception for you. Oh, something cool would be if aliens arrived and brought the cure for cancer. That's a little generic, but how many times a day do you have this thought? Something cool would be if I was able to fly, but only when blah. And this is a lot of the stuff I'm thinking of is more science fiction based, but wouldn't it be cool if, and I think that Ursula K. Le Guin probably posed this question when she wrote books like The Left Hand of Darkness. Wouldn't it be cool if gender had no effect on our society? Which is sort of the premise of The Left Hand of Darkness if you're unfamiliar. Wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if? And that's something that you can use either as a writing exercise, or once that idea sort of starts to formulate and grow inside of your mind, then you would be able to go from there and build your outline. I'd really like to talk about, this is what a lot of nonfiction stems from. I'd really like to talk about a serious issue. I'd really like to talk about my time growing up in Southern California. I'd really like to talk about writing, and that's what my book is about. I thought I would really like to talk at length about this subject, and I was able to, from there, pick some ideas, pick some thoughts, and some specific things I wanted to talk about, and go from there. The next thing that I really want to talk about is the next thing that I really want to talk about is outlining story arcs, character arcs, and so my next book is going to focus primarily on those things. It's not going to have most of the content that my first book did. It'll be its own thing, and it'll focus on the next thing that I would really like to talk about. Have you ever noticed? That's another place that your ideas can come from. Have you ever noticed that whenever there's a lot of traffic on the road, whenever there's a lot of people stopped on the road, that there's often not actually anything blocking it? Have you ever noticed that people turn their heads and look, even though they don't have to slow down, they don't have to stop? I actually witnessed this just yesterday evening, driving home from town during rush hour, and there was one car parked on the shoulder and there was another car stopped behind it. Nothing blocking the road, there was no collisions, no debris, and everyone was stopped. And in that section of road, everything was stopped. And then past that point, suddenly everything cleared up, and there was no explanation for it. So that could be something I'd really like to talk about, or have you ever noticed? Writing everything down. A vital step of building your outline is to write down every idea, every notion, every thought, even if it's just in parentheses next to your section. I would like to maybe explore this idea, or here's a thing that I think would be interesting for this section. Write it down. One of the biggest lies that that any of us really tell ourselves is, I'll remember that. I don't need to write that down. I'll remember that. You will not. I guarantee. That thought that you woke up with this morning, what was it? Do you remember? Did you write it down? Because if you did not write it down, guess what? It's gone now, and you are probably not getting it back. I don't know how many times I have been standing in the shower or in line somewhere or driving in my car and thought, ooh, I want to add that to my outline. And then not 10 minutes later, cannot remember, could not tell you what it was. So if you need to have a voice recorder with you, if you need to have a little notebook, anything that you need to carry with you to facilitate you writing down or storing your ideas, do so. And if you're here in person with us, those little notebooks in front of you with the pens, start writing your ideas in those. They're small enough to fit in a bag, they're small enough to fit in a computer case, they're small enough to fit in a briefcase. Keep something with you to write stuff down, or take notes on your phone. There's no superior or inferior way of doing it, as long as you have a way to remind yourself of what that critical thought pertaining to your book was. Jack and Jill. We're going to start with some examples through Jack and Jill. These are your characters. Jack and Jill. A lot of times my ideas start with not really a plot or a notion, but a character I'd really like to talk about. That's actually the book that I am working on right now, my urban fantasy, which I'm about 60,000 words into. I'm almost done. It was less about the story I wanted to tell and more about the characters that I wanted to explore and talk about. And we could easily get into character-driven versus plot-driven. I won't delve too far into that today for time's sake, but I will say that I believe that character-driven plots are in some ways superior to plot-driven stories, just because we find motive more relatable than just things happening, because as people we make decisions. So where did they go? Jack and Jill did what? They went up the hill. So if we're writing a book based on an outline from a limerick, then we need to then ask, what's the journey like? What did they take with them? Why were they going? Why did these two specific people have to do this and not someone else? Were they being told to go there by an outside party? Were they being made to go up there by their parents? Did they just decide to do it? Was it for fun? Did they feel like there was a shortage of water in their village? What is it that made them take that journey? So what is their purpose? What is their goal? Why? To fetch a pail of water. And once we get to the why, we start to get more into character motives. We start to get more into, hey, wait a minute, why would that character do that? And is that something that they would normally do? Is this a place they would normally go, a journey they would normally take? Have they done it before? Experience is going to be relevant to the plot. A lot of times we want to talk about things that a character's never done before. And maybe it's something that you have done before, and so you would like to have someone else sort of walk a mile in your shoes or experience what you have experienced. Maybe you're trying to share this experience with the world, and so maybe you're trying to learn something about yourself. What would make me take this journey? What would be my motive for doing this? What happened when they got there? So all of those prior questions are going to help you figure out what happens to your characters when they arrive at their destination. What happened when they got there? Jack fell down and broke his crown. So we can maybe surmise from this that he didn't have a lot of experience going up and down that hill. He tripped, or he lost his balance, or maybe he's just a klutz. All things that we can discover as we're putting together our plot and as we're determining more motive and more backstory, character experience, and so on. So what did Jill do? Jill was on this trip with Jack. So the cool thing about writing not necessarily ensemble casts, but casts that have more than one character in them, is that when character A does something, you get to write a reaction from character B. And you can showcase differences or similarities between characters as you do this. There will be some crossover between plotting and plot arcs and character arcs, because they all tie together to make your story whole and to make your story complete. So what did Jill do? How does character B react in this situation? Well, Jill came tumbling after. So what we can probably learn is that neither one of them really has experience going up and down this hill and are prone to falling or are prone to falling. So when we ask, have they done this? What's their motive? What are their similarities and what are their differences? It's not just questions that we're asking for fun. We're asking these questions because they help us to understand both how the characters are going to act and react in certain situations and what's going to happen when they take those actions, because their experience and their motivations build the next scene. Resolution. Now the thing is that with this tale, we don't really get a resolution. After all, this is a limerick, not a fully fleshed out story. So what's our resolution? Well, hopefully it's Jack and Jill learned not to run down the hill. Hopefully it's that Jack is not dead or concussed seriously. It does say he broke his crown, so I guess we can probably imagine he cracked his head open and that Jill lived. So maybe Jill learned something about not charging into situations needlessly. We can hope the best for poor Jack. Fleshing out each section, which is sort of what I just did, but let's get a little bit more into that. Some parts of your outlining, character development, and character arc setup will cross over, like I said, because the more that you understand your characters and their motivations, the easier it will be to craft your plot. So when we, like I said, ask those questions about Jack and Jill, we are building their backstories, we are building their arcs, we are anticipating what they're going to do, how they're going to respond to the situations that we give to them, and we are hopefully building toward a resolution at the end of the story, or some way that we want them to grow or to change or to improve as we move forward. The more of this that you do, the more of this introspection, and I say introspection, that's more what we do for ourselves. The more of this character exploration that we do, the better chance you have of writing a full and complete story and character arc, and the easier it's going to be to get through each phase of the drafting process, the editing process. The easier it will be for you to talk about and explain your story, which if you read the blog that I wrote about themes, you can see is actually pretty important, having your sort of arcing ideas and concepts visible through each part of your story. Aside from character motivation, determine what your motivation is. What do you want the reader to take away from your book? Work that into the outline as well. So aside from, oh, what was their experience? Oh, why did they do this? Oh, have they done it before? Figure out what story it is that you want to tell. What theme or motif do you want to carry over into your book? Is there something about yourself that you are trying to explore or understand better? Is there a story, just a cool idea that you had, and now you want to do it justice? Why do you need to tell this story? Why does it have to be you that writes it? Why do you feel like you are going to tell it and share it better than anyone else? As you get into your drafting process, there will be points in time where you feel defeated. And I say this not to discourage you, but to encourage you. Everyone starts to feel that way, who is even successful authors who've written books, except for maybe Stephen King. I don't think he knows what doubt is. Everyone starts to feel that way at a certain point. Everyone starts to feel tired and hopeless and defeated. And if you understand your reasons for writing this book, if you understand your own motivations, you won't find yourself at that exhausted phase asking yourself why, because you will already have answered that question. One thing that I suggest you do is write down those motivations and slap them up on your workspace. Put them on your wall, your corkboard, your whiteboard, whatever it is. Give yourself some positive affirmations to remind yourself why you need to write this story. And then don't be afraid to work that into your outline as well. You know, things that you find important, put them in there. A lot of times we censor ourselves and we change our stories to fit a genre or to fit a target audience or to appeal to our imagined reader. And when you do that, you're taking away your own motivation for writing, and you're giving it to someone else. You're putting the onus on the audience. And what can happen, the big risk that you run when you do that, is that you have now written a book for someone else. And if that book goes to your audience and is not praised and exalted upon its receipt, which it likely will not be, then you're going to be very disappointed and you're not going to want to write anymore. And that's the worst thing that you as a writer can do to yourself, is lose your motivation, lose your drive. So remember why you are writing, and remember why you have to be the one to tell this story, and keep that in mind as you go through every stage of the drafting and outlining process. That's not easy to do. It's tempting. It's so tempting. And I'm a victim of this myself, to think, oh, but will the audience like that? Don't worry about if the audience will like it. The audience will tell you. That's why you have beta readers. That's why you have advanced reader critiques. It's why you do all of that stuff, so that you can find out later if it works for your audience. And what you will almost always find is that when your motive is clear in the book, the audience will connect with it. When your theme is strong and prominent in your prose, the audience will connect with it, because there's something universal that we all have when it comes to what we write in our books. There's some kind of connection that we all share. And when you're writing to cater or to coddle, your reader will detect that, and they will not feel that your work is genuine, and they may not enjoy it for that reason. And then you won't enjoy what you've written. So you should find your joy in the process. Put that joy into your outline, and then put the joy from your outline into your draft, and you will be so much happier with what you write. This is the point. Perform necessary research at this stage, but don't overdo it. Your draft will reveal what else you need to learn. Hint, it won't be everything all at once. We call this the research hole. A lot of times authors, especially new authors writing a topic that's somewhat unfamiliar to them, will spend all of their prep time doing research and learning obscure things about battleships or swords or dress in the 18th century, when what you need to know will reveal itself as you go forth and as you plot your book. Don't worry about working everything into the outline right there at the beginning. It's not going to be as important as you probably think it is. There will be details as you go through your book that you spend 2 hours researching so that you can have one line about a purple dress or whatever it is that you have, whatever that one line is. But you don't know what you'll need for that one line until you've written that one line. And then you think, oh, right, I need to do some research on that. But if you spend your whole preparation process trying to anticipate everything that you will need, you are never going to start writing your book. So do preliminary research, kind of find out the basics of what you'll need. And as you build your plot, again, those things will reveal themselves to you. But don't spend your whole preparation process trying to anticipate every single issue that the draft will come up with. You will learn, and once you're there, then you can find out. Then you can add that information to your outline or your notes, or just put it in your draft. Maybe you don't need that information again, but make sure that you actually get to the next step of the process. Write in any additional ideas you would like to include. So this could be, I forgot I really wanted to have this plot point, or, ooh, it would be really neat if this character had to experience this. And what you can do from this point is kind of find out what will need to change in the structure of your story in order for that little piece of information to work. And don't be afraid to add those little nuggets, those little tidbits, because those things are going to ultimately strengthen your story. Things that you really want to talk about or really want to put in there, it's good to go in and to talk about at length, both in your plot and in your actual draft. Compelling arcs. So we're getting on to the next meat and bones section of the writing process, which is discovering your arcs. So once you have your plot sort of built and these ideas put together, now it's time to go in and refine all of your arcs. So I don't know if you can see this infographic on the live stream, but let's look at a couple sections here. This is in an arcing pattern. It's why we call it an arc, because it arcs up, and this is something you'll see in common with a lot of infographics for building stories, is that they're going to come up in an up pattern and then fall down. Now, there are different sort of patterns that you can see depending on genres that you're looking at. Like if you're looking at romance, you'll probably see more of like an up, down, or I see a lot of things put together for, I've been watching a lot of Korean dramas lately, and the infographics I see put together for them are kind of hilarious because they start here and then they go up and then they go down, sharp up, and then sharp up and then sharp down. So this can look however you want it to. You know, if you look at this for maybe a book like Lord of the Rings, you'll see one big arc like this, but then underneath it, you'll see each of the subplots where it's sort of up and down throughout the course of the trilogy. So don't be afraid to make this look how you want it to, but remember this general arcing up and then swooping down pattern, because that's how you're going to build the energy in your story. And this is how successful stories arc. Traditionally, this is a working formula. So you have your inciting incident, which would be the event at the beginning of the story that kicks everything off. Your confrontation or complication, something that goes wrong, because if nothing goes wrong, then where's your story at? Your climax, which is the big part of the story, like, oh, everything is coming to a head right now, and something big's about to happen. The big decision from your character, which will lead to the plot resolution or the end of your story. And after the resolution, if you really feel like you need an epilogue, you can add something like that. There's some debate about the merit of epilogues and whether it's worth incorporating them into the end of your story or if it just sort of takes away your inertia, but I'd say that's more up to you, because like I said before, don't coddle or cater to your audience too much, because then it takes away some of the genuineness from your own process. So we're going to get into each of these steps a little bit more detailed. Let's start with the inciting incident. So the inciting incident is the event at the beginning of your story that kicks off your story's events. Jack and Jill went up the hill. We talked about this a little bit before, so let's really think about what that means. So ideally, you're starting either at the beginning or just before the beginning. You never want to start after, because bouncing back and forth in time like that, unless you're very experienced and know how to build the right tension with that, is not going to work for you, especially not on your first book. So start there. They went up the hill. We're starting our journey. We're off on a hero's journey. So we've got our packs, we've got our pail, our empty pail, and we're hiking up the hill, lacing up our boots. And I talk about tension sometimes. It's often right at the inciting incident that you build your first moment of tension. A lot of people, when they talk about starting with a hook, they refer to an action sequence or throwing your reader right into something exciting or some kind of peril. It doesn't even necessarily have to be that. In your very first chapter, what you can do is start with a complication. You can start with, oh, well, we were gathering provisions to go on this journey, but suddenly a hurricane came and we had to evacuate town, and now we all have to trudge across the wilderness with nothing, on this trip we were planning to make. And so you build that sort of sense of disappointment or that tension right there at the beginning. And then you have the whole rest of your book to fix it. Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill shows agency. The characters made a decision that started the story. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but if Jack and Jill decided to go up the hill, that would be something that more specifically shows a little bit of agency. That would be something that, gives your characters some autonomy. Should we go up the hill? Jack asked Jill. I think we should. So having that conversation right at the beginning, and here's something I did want to talk about that I did not add to any of my slides, but I'm good on time, so I'm going to delve into it a little bit. Having a passive passive character is okay for the first act of your story. And I didn't get into acts here because that's a whole other conversation. But in the beginning of your story, it's actually okay to have a more passive character. When you think about stories like The Hunger Games or Percy Jackson or even Harry Potter, you start out with a character who is not necessarily interested in other goings-on of the world. Someone who is just kind of looking out for themselves and trying to get from day to day to day. And what happens in these stories, the inciting incident is, oh, guess what? You're a demigod. Oh, guess what? You're a wizard. Oh, guess what? Your sister's been drafted into the war. What are you going to do? And so you can start with a character who's not really interested in the plot and throw them into it, but you cannot allow that character to remain passive throughout the entire story, because passive characters are boring to read unless you have done it in a way that is quite funny and interesting. The only example of a good passive character I can think of would be Arthur Dent from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He's just sort of existing as things go on around him. The difference is he's there to exist as the normal person who connects to the reader, who would probably be like, I don't understand what is happening because this is a strange and alien world. My mom and I call this the Jimmy Bond character. Someone who exists solely so that information about the world building can be fed to the audience through dialogue with this character. So you can start with a passive character, but then have them begin making decisions fairly quickly, because characters who make decisions drive the plot forward and sort of spew plot all over the place. A good, strong, active character will determine your plot very quickly and help you to move your story forward. Starts a physical journey that could align with an emotional one or with a lesson. So something you want to do is have the arc of your plot sort of follow the arc of your character. When you have Jack and Jill heading up the hill, maybe we are seeing ambition. Maybe we're seeing somebody doing something that they wouldn't normally do. Maybe not. We don't have enough information from that particular story. But we can sort of gauge what's going to happen internally as the plot moves forward. So as we go along our physical journey, it's time for our characters to face something about themselves that maybe they wouldn't normally face. Maybe it's something that they have been too scared to confront before. And so having your characters start on a physical journey helps you to align an emotional one. Now, that's not saying that you can't have a plot that takes your character solely through an emotional journey. You can absolutely do that, and we see this in literature all the time, in romance, in contemporary fiction, in biographies. We have characters who maybe aren't traveling, who are stagnant, who are staying in one place, but the events around them are helping them to learn something that maybe they wouldn't have learned otherwise. And so having the physical align with the emotional helps drive your story forward through the character. Motivation drives plot. This is what we were just talking about. Let's get a little more into this. Understanding why your characters do things helps you to learn what they do next. So understanding what my character is going to this destination for will help me to understand what might happen when they arrive. Are they going because it's a journey they've done a million times? This is their job. Well, if that's the case, then I probably need to throw something in there that kind of takes them for a new loop, something that they haven't experienced before. And it also helps you learn how they are going to react to certain situations that arise. Are they good in emergencies and that's why they're going, so they know what they're going to do? Or are they somewhere that are they encountering something they've never encountered before? And based on what they want from the journey, how are they going to respond to that situation? When you understand what it is that you want, think about in your personal life. I'm going to the store. I really want a gallon of ice cream. I've been craving this one ice cream for days now, and I'm finally going to go. I'm finally doing it. When I get there, the store is closed. This is the one store I know for sure carries the ice cream that I want. So my motivation, am I strongly driven enough to drive to another store, risking that they may or may not have it? Do I have the energy? Do I have the will? Is that something I'm going to do? Or am I the type of person who's going to say, never mind, I didn't really want it that bad anyway, and then drive back home? Well, if I'm that second type of person, I'm probably a pretty boring protagonist. But if I'm that first type of person, I'm going to the next store. Now, because I'm at this next place, something else happens that I wouldn't normally encounter because I've been taken off my normal route. I've been taken off my normal plot, my normal course of action, and now I'm doing something a little bit new and maybe a little bit scary. And how am I going to react to that? You have to understand my motives and my desires and my ultimate want before you're able to write the next part. Actions have consequences, and both affect your story. Both the actions and the consequences therein. So when you understand what your character is going to do, you are then able to plot consequences following it. Now, consequences are often external. Characters don't usually have a lot of control over what happens after they have acted. And so consequences are what you can use to sort of volley with your characters. And a great author always volleys with their characters. What can I throw at them that will make this just that much harder for them? The consequences will then determine what your character does next, how they act next. And so it becomes this feedback loop of my actions affecting consequences, affecting my actions moving forward. And that's what you want for your story. That's how you create tension. That's how you create action. That's how you create plot. Ask yourself, what made my character decide to take this action? What outcome are they expecting? And what outcome do they get? Bonus points if the two outcomes are different. So in my hypothetical situation, I'm expecting to drive to Walmart, grab my ice cream, and drive home. This is the idea that I have put in my head. One of my favorite examples of this actually is the scene in Shaun of the Dead, which is near the beginning. So if you haven't seen the film and you would like to not have any spoilers, now's the time to stop listening. But there's a scene near the beginning where Shaun is thinking, okay, here's how we're going to get through this. We're going to go pick up Mom, we're going to go pick up my girlfriend, and we're going to drive to the bar, and we're going to wait this all out. And he goes into this in great detail, like, no, I've got this. I know exactly how this is going to go. And the cool thing about Shaun of the Dead, one of my favorite elements actually, is that things do kind of go according to plan. He does all of the things that he said he was going to do, but not quite how he thought he was going to do them. He did not foresee himself going through some of the actions that he winds up going through in the movie. And you can follow that same kind of formula when you write your book. Here's how I foresee this going. And that's how a lot of sort of modern comedies are actually written. What's it called? Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. They do, just not the way that they think they're going to. Tenacious D, you can see a lot of comedies following this. Here's our plan. Here's where we're going. This is how we're going to get it done. And then along the way, they do ultimately achieve their goal. It's just not exactly how they thought that it was going to go. And you can do that. Or you can say, you had plans? Well, guess what? I'm throwing this complication at you now. And understanding your character's motivation will help you to then discover how they're going to react to the complication you've just thrown at them. So you can go about that kind of either way. The confrontation or complication. Let's talk about this a little bit. Jack and Jill ascend the hill with the intention to fetch a pail of water. Yes, I'm very much aware that I just spocked that line. But let's talk about that a little bit, because we just sort of went through that with Shaun of the Dead. So Jack and Jill had this plan. We're going to go up the hill. we're going to get a pail of water, we're going to come back down, and that's going to be that. That's how our day's going to go. I'm going to drive to the store, I'm going to get ice cream, I'm going to drive home. That's how my day's going to go. That's the thing that I'm going to do. Jack fell down and broke his crown. So obviously, the first half of the journey was going pretty well. They got up the hill, and if you look at some illustrations from the story, there's images of them carrying a pail full of water. We don't know if they ever actually got to the well, though. We don't know if they got that water. So your complication can come before or after the objective has been accomplished. It sort of depends on which one is going to serve your story more. There's no right or wrong answer to, oh, well, do I throw that wrench in there before or after they've done the thing that they said they were going to do? Can your story move forward if they're able to accomplish that? An unforeseen complication, the actual outcome is different than the expected outcome. I don't think Jack was expecting to fall and bust his head open. I was expecting the store to be open when I got there. They're normally open on, what day is it? Friday? They're normally open on a Friday afternoon. It's usually no big deal. Walk in, get what I want, and come out. But because of a meteor striking the parking lot, suddenly I can't get into my favorite Walmart. Because of renovations that are going on, I suddenly can't get into the store that I know where I'm going. Maybe Jack fell after he got his water, and now the story is really about them somehow finding a way to get back to town before Jack dies. It really depends on which part of the story you are wanting to tell and which part of the journey you are wanting to take your readers along. Building tension. Jack is hurt. What will Jill do in response to Jack falling down the hill and cracking his head open? There's probably not a lot of peril to be had from a pair walking up a hill with a bucket of water. What we understand from this rhyme is that that's a fairly simple journey. It's pretty straightforward. My journey to the Walmart was pretty simple. I got in my car and I drove there. So the tension or the interest comes after that point in both of those cases, where now we have to see how the characters are going to respond to this complication and understand, like I said, understanding their motivation will help you to better write the next parts of the story out. If you know how your characters feel about that situation, if you understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish or what it is that is lost or at stake because of this complication, you're able to continue with your plot from there. And then we have the pièce de résistance, which is the climax of the story. Potentially one of your most important selling points. So once you get to this point, you want to be done adding complications. And, well, maybe. There's some misunderstanding about how true to the formula you have to be. And the thing about formulaic writing is that it works. Obviously, there's a reason for this formula existing. Obviously, people have done this before, and it has served them. So you have to decide how much of that mold you want to break out of when you're writing the climax of your story. Because typically, you are not going to get to this point and then start a new plot or start a new complication. But there could be something that one of your side stories finally ties in, and this guy who you've been hearing about from the sidelines is suddenly relevant, and this adds a huge complication to the climax of your story. It's, it's Sam and Frodo getting to the mountain, and Gollum is there, and they have a fight to throw the ring into the pit. There's any big media that you look at, you can probably see the point where you thought that it was finally over, and suddenly there's a complication that's been thrown in. The thing is, once you're at that point, if you are adding a new complication, it has to be something that you have been planning sort of from the beginning. And that's not to say that you have to have been planning it all along in your drafting process, but it has to look like you have been prepared for that and you've been planning for it all along. So when you're going in and you're drafting and you decide you want to throw in this complication, You need to revisit your outline and then add things to your draft that support this complication you've just added at the climax point. So Jill came tumbling after, so we see how she's responded by running down the same route that Jack did and also falling, assumably not also breaking her head open, but then again, like I said, not enough information. Important to understand motive, both to predict and explain Jill's actions. What did she think was going to happen? And we go sort of back to that first question of expected outcome versus actual outcome. What is she thinking is going to happen when she runs down the hill after Jack, who's fallen down and just busted his head open? Is she thinking at all, or is she in a panic because, oh my God, there's blood everywhere and he's maybe dying? So you have to consider your character's motive. You have to consider all of those things in order to determine how they respond during the climax of the story. And this will build nicely onto the character arc portion as well. The resolution. So the resolution of your story is where everything is finally coming together. Everything is finally ending. We've dropped the ring into the mountain. We've defeated the government. We've beaten the Dementors, whatever it is. We're finally at the resolution, and we are finally seeing what the payoff for all of this setup and exposition is. What did Jack and Jill learn from this experience? Say she carries Jack home, gets him on a bed, and gets him bandaged up. Somehow, miraculously, he's fine, and they're having a conversation. What is it they're taking away from that? Are they never going to that hill again? Are they going to walk with more caution? What did they learn? What's the final moment of, okay, and scene? What is that moment? Is there someone else in the village who was relying on them for that water? And let's say we go with a non-traditional ending, the bad ending, the unhappy ending. Do all of the village people die because Jack and Jill couldn't get water back to the village? What is the end result of all of the actions, all of the build-up, all of the I can't think of the next word, but what happens at the end? What is my and so? Ideally, the resolution will both end the story and showcase character growth. So what you kind of want in your character and story arcs is for the final resolution of the story to present the changes that a person has made. Present the changes that your character has made in order to better understand both your themes and your plot and your character growth. You want your characters to have really gotten something out of the plot, or if not your characters, maybe your reader. Maybe it's something that you want the reader to understand. When we talk about The Boy Who Cried Wolf, it's a story, maybe the boy didn't learn his lesson, but your readers did. Your readers understood actions have consequences, and saying something repeatedly when it's not true is going to cause people to not believe you. And so that could be your cautionary tale. Could be, oh, well, I know the character didn't learn this, but now I understand something that I didn't before. Or, a common theme is people are alike everywhere. People are going to continue to make these mistakes no matter how many times we showcase them having bad consequences. A lack of character growth, as long as it's very clear to your audience that the character has not grown and why they have not grown, what their shortcomings are that have prevented them from growing up or from changing, then your character growth, even though it's not growth of the literal character, it's still present. Use this opportunity to tie in side stories. We talked about what happened to the mouse. Make sure you have that resolution there. And ideally, it will be relevant to the actual plot of the story and won't just be something that you are throwing in because, oh yeah, I forgot I mentioned this thing, and so let's tie that up. And that's something that I've seen in some classic literature, and I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but it's so much richer, and your story is going to benefit so much more if you tie in what happened on those side quests with your main story, if it's somehow relevant. Like when you see Lord of the Rings, everything that happens in the background while Frodo's on his way to the mountain with the ring somehow affects what happens at the very end of the story and becomes relevant to Frodo, to the main journey at the end. And it also serves the theme. I believe the theme is power corrupts. And so in every part of the story, we see this theme repeating with all of these different sort of side quests. So use your resolution to tie in your side stories and to strengthen your theme. Watch out for tropes. So we talk about tropes, and I talked about, what happened to the mouse, and I really wish I could remember. I know it, I just can't remember it off the top of my head. Tropes can serve you or harm you. Tropes themselves are not bad. They're motifs. They're common things that we see throughout literature, movies, television, short stories, poems, songs. Tropes are okay. The problem is when you execute them in a way that is bland or that is predictable. Well, not even predictable. Predictable can be okay as well. But when you execute them in a way that's not interesting, then you sort of fall into, oh, well, this is just another one of those stories. So common tropes are love triangles. This is my least favorite trope, and I know a lot of people do like this one, so I won't say anything bad about it, but you see love triangles, especially in young adult fiction. So you see, like, Twilight is one of the most, right now, well-known love triangles. You see this main character who's sort of torn between two guys, and we call it a triangle. It really doesn't have a third side. The triangle would be if the other two were also attracted to each other. So I kind of hate the term because it doesn't really track from a geometric standpoint, but I digress. So love triangles is a common one. It's a theme in Twilight. It's actually not in the Hunger Games books, but it is in the films. It's something that I could get into a whole other spiel about themes between books and films, but I won't do that. But in the Hunger Games film, there's a love triangle between Katniss, Peeta, and Gale. She's torn between them, trying to decide, who does she love? And it's a classic, simple trope. If that's your thing, go for it. And there's nothing wrong with writing something that you enjoy. But make sure that you do it in a way that is not bland, because there's nothing worse that someone can say about your book than it was boring. The evil one. Villains with no personality other than evil. Villains are one of my favorite things, and a well-written villain can really carry your story. I won't get too much into it, but the Parker Posey's character from the new Lost in Space series is a wonderful, magnificent villain with so much depth and so much going on. She's not evil, even though we see her do a lot of very morally questionable and maybe objectively evil things. That's not her personality. She has a motive, she has drive, she has something that she wants. And so we're seeing a character that is rich and is not just evil by nature, which when you look a little bit more at maybe the original Lost in Space, I don't know if I'd call Smith evil in that one either, but it was more of a caricaturized villain. When we think of classic villains, there should be more that we can say about them than just, oh, they were evil. And if you really want a good film to see for sort of an anti-hero or a villain as a protagonist, watch Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. It's very short. It's only about 38 minutes. And the main character is the villain with motive and personality and things that he wants. And he's doing bad things, but not because he is evil. The Ugly Duckling. Now, this trope I generally hate. I have not seen it done in a way that I like yet. It's typically a teenage girl who is traditionally not that attractive, and she gets some makeover from the popular girl, and suddenly all the boys are interested, and she gets the guy that she's wanted, and he falls in love with her for her personality, even though now she's beautiful. I would say avoid that trope, but if you find a way to make it work and to make it not misogynistic or shallow, absolutely go for it and do something incredible with it. Back to my small town. This is a trope that I do love. Someone has grown up in a small town. They've been living in the city for a while, but something happens and they have to go back home. And so the story sort of centers around them dealing with things that they didn't realize were wrong when they were young, or sort of rehashing or revisiting the reasons why they left. Or maybe they're visiting home because they miss it and they're learning that, oh, well, actually I didn't miss living here all that much. So that's a trope that is pretty neutral. It's a pretty neutral thing. It can go good or bad, really depending on your execution of it. The MacGuffin conspiracy or doomsday device. If you do not know, a MacGuffin is a material object meant to move the plot forward. Think the Ring in Lord of the Rings. Think the Tesseract from the early Avengers films. Anything that is being sought after by multiple parties or protected by one and sought after by another, like a doomsday device, that would be your MacGuffin. That would be something that, again, you can either do it really well or you can do it really poorly, and your execution will determine whether that is a good trope or a bad trope. Falls in love with the shy one. So there's a shy kid at school, or there's a quiet girl, or there's a quiet guy, and the boisterous, loud, outgoing person gets stuck with them for some reason or another and starts to see, who they really are and falls in love with them for that. We see an example of this in the film A Walk to Remember. We see lots of examples of this in youth literature and in youth films and TV shows. There's a quiet protagonist and an outgoing, bubbly, maybe crush, or maybe someone they hate, maybe a nemesis. And over the course of the story, they fall in love. Again, it's a neutral trope. It just really depends on how you execute it. And there's more that you can look for. So as you're researching your plot, as you're moving forward and pulling your story together, keep an eye out for tropes and ask yourself, is this a trope that's been done the way that I'm doing it right now? Is this a trope that will hold up under scrutiny? Because tropes very quickly fall into one of two categories when you write them: good and bad. And you want to make sure that your trope is on the good side of the fence. We are going to get into character development now. So, optionally, you can use character sheets. I don't use them. I don't really care for them that much, but do as you will. If you need that information, then absolutely keep them. It just really depends on your style. So as we get further along, there will be more and more things that sort of just depend on what is going to suit you as a writer and suit your story. So character sheets, programs like Scrivener have character sheets built in, but you can also download and fill one out with Word or with a PDF like form filler, sort of however your favorite way to do it is, or you can print them out and fill them out with pen and paper. I know plenty of authors who just have a binder full of character sheets for their book. Most often you'll need this if you're doing like a big epic story or a trilogy where there's tons of characters and you have to keep track of who did what and who likes what and who hates what and who hates who. So it's up to you if you want to use character sheets, but they can be useful. The information on your sheet will depending on your character's role, so don't spend too much time on them. Just like with anticipating all of the needs in your story, don't try to anticipate all of your character traits. As you get into the draft, your characters will tell you about themselves. And what the best thing you can do is to keep your character sheets nearby if you are using them. If not, just add a little pinpoint to your outline. And my character said in this chapter that their favorite color is blue, and so now I have to remember that 14 chapters later when they're picking out a shirt for this event and another character says, oh, my favorite color is blue, and they have this in common. Whatever it is that you need. Just don't spend a bunch of time thinking right at the beginning, oh, well, I need to make sure I understand this. I need to make sure that I know this. I need to make sure that I have this prepared. You don't. Slow down, start drafting, and as you get into the draft, all of that information about your characters will reveal itself to you. Here is a quick example of what a character sheet might look like. This is actually a more traditional one from Dungeons & Dragons. As you can see, there's a lot of information. When you're building a character for D&D, you have obviously a lot of stats you have to track, a lot of traits you have to track. You're not going to need the D&D character sheet for your book. I almost 100% guarantee it. Even if you're writing a D&D type story that has, a lot of this information, you don't need to rattle off stats to your audience. They don't need that. So as you mention the things and as skills are revealed, you can add them to your character sheet, but please don't fill this out and then put all that information in your book, because I guarantee you will be overwhelmed and you will be info dumping like crazy. This is a little bit of a better example of what a good character sheet would look like for a book. You can also use this. Again, it really just depends on what your story calls for and what your methodology benefits best from. Pardon me. Unusual situations help you learn. One of my favorite things about more dramatic television series, and something I think we're missing now that we've gone to the 10-episode season, is episodes where characters don't necessarily have something plot-wise to do, and so they end up doing something or in a situation we wouldn't normally see them in. So when you see very serious characters doing something silly, or very silly characters forced to deal with something kind of serious, it makes you examine the character more closely. So as you get more into your arcs, you can do some of these for like a writing exercise or to learn something about your character. So insert your character into an unusual situation outside the normal parameters of your book. This is something that I love doing whenever I'm writing a novel and I'm stuck on one spot and I'm just not really feeling it. I'll take a break, I'll take my characters and pick a writing prompt and then just throw my characters into that writing prompt and sort of see how it plays out and see how they react to those situations. And I almost always learn something about them. Another trick you can use is taking an online quiz as your character. So something that, those online quizzes that are like, what kind of potato are you? Go into that quiz and answer questions as if you were the character in your book. And what you'll find, again, is that you are learning to examine their decisions and their motivations and to help you flesh them out and make them a more whole person. Give them a favorite color, food, song, etc., and a reason for having it. I love music-based characters. I see scenes vividly in my head when I listen to music. I can imagine my characters responding to those scenes. I can imagine my characters responding to the music itself. And I love giving them favorite songs. All of my characters have a favorite song and a least favorite song. Whether or not I've written it down, they have it. And if I thought about it for 1 second, I could probably tell you what it was. Give them a favorite color. Give them a favorite food. When you look at Percy Jackson, his favorite color, I think, is blue, if I'm remembering that correctly. He certainly prefers to eat anything that is blue. And the reason why is, it's something silly that him and his mom came up with, was blue food. Blue food is very unusual. So why be normal when you can have blue food? And that's something that helps him to feel closer to the parent that he loves and cherishes. So give them a reason for having these favorites. And again, that helps you examine their motivations and the things that they are looking for. Flawed but likable. You may notice that I have an image of Parker Posey here. That would be Dr. Smith from the new Lost in Space series on Netflix. And if you have not seen it, I cannot think of a better example of great storytelling. So flawed but likable. Give your characters flaws. Perfect characters can't grow. So when you start your story, having the stoic, quiet, perfect at everything kind of protagonist can be tempting for some authors. And what you may find if you are tempted to write that character is, rather than just making them perfect, think of the journey you want to take them on. Think of one thing that you can have them learn, or that would be really fun or interesting to see a character like that learn and discover. And then give them a flaw that facilitates that plot. Give them something to learn or a bad habit to undo that will allow them to grow through the course of the story. Give them a fear or a weakness that will become relevant as the story goes on. Likable does not necessarily mean good. Anti-heroes make good protagonists too. So when we talk about Dr. Horrible, the main character is actually the villain not of the story, but he is the villain or the anti-hero, sort of the bad guy. He does bad things. And you look at the hero of the story, which is Captain Hammer, and he's a good guy, but you hate him. You hate him through the whole story. And so likable and good are not synonymous. They do not go together. And same thing with the villain from Lost in Space, Parker Posey's Dr. Smith. She is arguably not a good person, but she's so likable, both as, I think, a person charisma-wise in the show and as a villain character, because there's so much depth and there's so many complicated little cogs moving as the story goes on. So don't be afraid to make your characters kind of bad, but give them something that the audience can connect to. Give them something that makes them likable, more appreciable. Relatable flaws give your reader another layer of connection. So what's a motive that a character might have that would make the audience or the reader go, oh my gosh, I understand that. I totally get that. If you can give your character a flaw like that and then a meaningful way to sort of to grow or change from that, your audience is going to connect to that so hard. I recently read a work in progress, a book by an author who I was not expecting to connect to the main character the way that I did, or as well as I did. And because of the things that she learned and the way that she grew throughout the story, I felt like I was learning and growing with her. And that's such a powerful tool. If you can give your reader just a modicum of what I felt reading that book, then you are absolutely on the right track. Not tracked. People change. Characters should too. We talked about this a little bit, and I won't get too into depth, but people grow. We learn as we age, and we learn as we have new experiences, and your characters should do the same thing. Characters should follow a relatable, realistic path of growth or change. And again, some people don't change. Some people never learn and keep making the same mistakes over and over. But your reader should recognize that and be able to relate to it somehow and maybe grow from that themselves. So determine which flaws you want your character to keep and which ones you want to improve by the story's end. Some characters are going to sort of go half and half. They won't get all the way better, but they'll take some steps. And maybe there's some more that they have to overcome before their story's over. But by the end of your story, you can sort of decide which things it is that you want them to improve from and which things it is that you're sort of okay with them leaning back on. An interesting thing you can do too is make them think that they have to fix something about themselves, but then learn by the end, actually, this flaw is okay. It's all right for me to feel this way or to be this way. How does the character's journey strengthen or improve them? I will not spoil the book that I read, but the overall theme of her book was hope. And I really felt at the end of the book her hope for the first time, and it made me feel hopeful as well for all of these struggles that I shared with the character. And so what has happened during your journey that has helped your character to grow and to improve as a person? And how's the journey itself strengthened or improved them? And then What strength have they found within themselves? What do they lose through the story? This is something that is less common in genre fiction and more common in literary fiction. I personally believe there should be a lot of crossover, but I don't really have time to talk about that today. But what do they lose? What have they experienced and felt that has made them, a part of them, sort of maybe not die, but grow? And is that good? Is that bad? Are you setting yourself up for a sequel? So consider all of these things. Consider how your characters change, what they gain and what they lose. And how do you want the reader to feel? And what parts of the story can evoke those emotions? Like I said, the theme of the book that I read was hope. And the author used so many scenarios to tear the character and the reader down and make us feel hopeless and lost and desolate. And then from that foundation was able to bring hope back, even when you think that it is all is lost, it's not. And so consider for yourself how you want your reader to feel, and then how you can incorporate that theme into every part of your story. We are going to take a brief break. We will be back, I believe 15 minutes, yes. So at 10:45 Central Time, we will return for the next segment. We're going to get into the writing every day, finding time to write, and then what the editorial process looks like and the difference between self and traditional. I will see you soon. We have sound. We have sound. And we've got visual. Hello and welcome back. So when we left off, we were just going to get into the next section, which is finding the time to write. So the number one thing that I see whenever I'm coming up to trying to help someone come up with a plan to write their book is, I don't have time. So many people complain that they just aren't going to be able to find a slot of time to work on their book. Looking at the watch, looking at the clock. So I have a couple of solutions here for you. First, let's talk about excuses. Between work and school, travel, kids, obligations, even social obligations, where do I find the time to write? To that I say, you do not. No one finds time to write. You make the time. Making writing a priority is the only way you will ever get your book done. Treat your writing like work. Don't take calls or answer texts. Push it aside for other activities or call out unless you are genuinely sick. So think about your work schedule. You have a schedule that you come up with at the beginning of your work period, if it's the week, if it's the month, if it's the quarter, whatever it is, you have your schedule. You are expected to come to work, get your work done, and not take calls or answer texts while you are helping customers or going through accounts or whatever it is that you do in your day job. So treat your writing like work. Don't call out. Don't make up reasons not to come unless you're genuinely unable to for some reason. Oh, I'm just too tired. Oh, I'm just too tired to work on my book. If you are too tired to work on your book ever, even though it's something that you are genuinely motivated and want to do, you may have too much on your plate. So what can you drop to give yourself more energy? If you are committing to something that's not contributing to your growth or to your emotional well-being, because it is important to do social activities that make you happy, what is it that you can drop that will give you more time to work on your book? If you can't drop something, consider smaller goals. Start with 10 to 15 minutes a day. So I hear writers complain a lot about, I just don't have time to write. You know, I'm only trying to write for like an hour or two. Even an hour or two may be too much for you to take on right now. It doesn't sound like a lot of time when you say it, because we think about how quickly an hour passes when we're commuting to work or when we're getting ready in the morning. We think about how quickly an hour passes over our lunch break, or when we are really busy at work and we're trying to get all these projects done. But an hour is a pretty significant chunk of time. So if you don't have an hour to commit to your writing, or if you're too tired to write for an hour at the end of a 10-hour workday, don't. Just take 10 to 15 minutes. Work on your book. Use your social media time to write. Rather than scrolling through Facebook over your lunch break, write down some ideas or add a few words to your draft. So how often do you sit down with your phone in your hand and scroll through Facebook, through Reddit, through Twitter? I know I'm pretty guilty of doing the third one myself. But how many hours a day, how many minutes a day do you spend just looking at your social media feed rather than working just towards something that's productive? And I don't think there's anything wrong with social media. I know there have been some studies done that show like whatever with your brain chemistry, but I think that there are good aspects to social media. However, if you're letting that take up all of your free time, and so much so that you don't have 10 to 15 minutes just to spend on your book, you need to cut back and find that time in your social media time. Instead of scrolling through Facebook, sit down with your notebook, sit down with your idea pad, sit down with your laptop or your tablet. Add a few words to your draft, add a few ideas to your outline, do a little bit of research, read up on something about your book. Write every day. This is one of the most common pieces of writing advice that I've ever heard. It's also one of the most widely misinterpreted. People think write every day means be Stephen King. Sit down for 3 to 5 hours and draft prolifically. And that is not what this means. It doesn't literally mean to write every day. Again, consider the work week. You have weekends, right? You have days off. You have vacations that you take. You go to someone's birthday party or a wedding, or you take off your birthday. It doesn't mean that you have to sit down Monday through Sunday and spend 10 to 15 minutes on your book those days. It just means set a schedule for yourself, and every day that you have committed to writing, keep that commitment and write on those days. Don't push it aside. Don't belittle your obligation to your book. Keep your book at the forefront of your mind. So even if you're not actively working on it, I heard a metaphor recently that I really liked. When you bring cold water to a boil, it takes quite a bit of time. But if you have your water at a simmer and then you turn the heat up to a boil, then it actually doesn't take that long at all. But it still takes a while for it to simmer. The thing is, you can leave it at a simmer for much longer than you can leave it at a full boil. So think of your writing similar to this. If you're thinking about your book, and if you're working on it for 10 to 15 minutes most days, you're keeping your water at a simmer. You're keeping your creativity at a simmer. And those days when you're ready to sit down and do the 2 to 3 hour writing sprint, you can turn it up to boil, and it's gonna take much more quickly. And you'll get a lot more productivity out of that time than if you had just put aside that 2 or 3 hours. It'll be a much more effective use of your time on those days. Work on some aspect of your book. Fine-tuning, outlining, doing research, and developing characters all count. When I was at Narrativity last year, I brought up the Write Everyday question to a panel. And Bobby Brimmer, who is an independent author, said, yes, to write every day, but understand that there are things that count as writing which do not necessarily mean adding to your draft. Anytime you're doing research, refining your plot, refining your character development, working on arcs, that all counts as working on your book. That all counts as writing. So if you've put aside writing time and your 10 to 15 minutes is just spent doing research for part of your plot, that still counts as fulfilling your obligation to your book. You're keeping your book at the forefront of your mind, and you're working on something that you would have to work on anyway. Keep moving forward. This is a tough one, I think, especially for new authors, because there's some intimidation that comes along with trying to stick to just one story and not really being sure if things are working. So let's talk about that a little bit. Don't self-edit during your first draft. People get stuck in what I call the revision loop, and I think I talk about that a little bit more on this slide, but I'll touch on it. Don't get so hung up on what you've written that you can't write more. Don't go backward while you're still on your first draft of your book, because you'll have plenty of opportunities to fix things as you proceed. So don't worry too much about, oh, that chapter that I wrote before, I remembered I wanted to add this thing. Don't do that. Keep moving forward in your draft. If you remember something you needed to mention, make note of it and add it later. I actually have a section in my outline at the very bottom that says things to change. And so as I'm going through, when I remember something that I wanted to do or something that I wanted to do differently, what I'll do is I'll add it to that little section, like, oh, here's my idea for my first edit. And during my first round of self-edits, then I'll go in and sort of make those adjustments and make those changes, but not until I've completed the first draft, because I can go back and change things forever without ever finishing my draft. And I almost guarantee you and every other author out there could as well. So just keep writing. Don't worry too much about what you've written. Focus on what you're going to write. Don't like the scene you just wrote? Limit yourself to one alteration, then move on. A lot of times I will get hung up on something if I have just written a scene and I don't feel like it's moving the story forward in the way that I want it to. And so I give myself one chance to change it. And I'll take a minute, I'll set it aside for a day, and I'll think about what it was that made me feel like it put me in a stuck spot. And then that next day during my writing time, I'll go back and I'll change that scene. And if I'm still not happy with it, guess what? It goes in the things to change section on my notes, and then gets put aside, and I'll proceed with the story as though the scene went my way. And then during my first round of edits, guess what? I can go in and change it then. And I can spend all the time in the world making alterations at that point. Don't get stuck in a revision loop. Finish the first draft before implementing major changes. So, like I said, you can get easily pulled into that cycle of, I didn't like this, I just need to change one more thing before I move on. And then what happens is you get stuck and you can't continue drafting because the previous chapters aren't perfect yet. And this can happen as well once you finish the first draft. You can keep making changes and keep making changes and think of something you want to fix. And I don't remember who said it, but art is never perfect, it's just complete. So you have to pick an ending point and you have to decide, when am I going to stop changing things? When am I going to stop making alterations? And finally, commit this to being my final product. And it's important, and you can use feedback partners for this part as well, because they can help you see when it's done. And it's important not to be obsessed with perfecting it and just let yourself move on. Pardon me, I'm beginning to lose my voice. Focus on one project. This is also sort of a rookie mistake that I see, and especially when you are just starting out with writing, make sure you have one pet project that you are wanting to complete before you move on to anything else. When you get, we call them plot bunnies, when you get the plot bunnies, write down your idea and then put it aside, put it in the hopper, and you can come back to it when you are done with your current project. Don't start another book while drafting your first. When you are drafting, don't work on another project. You can have multiple editing things going on at once, but while drafting, it's imperative that you have your focus centered. So keep yourself looking at that one project, keep yourself pulled in on it, and don't let yourself get distracted with other projects or shiny new book ideas. Stay focused on your project. If you do need a break, try reading or watching a TV show. Another thing you can do is fulfill writing prompts as sort of a writing break, but instead I really genuinely encourage authors to consume rather than to create when they're taking a break, because it gives you that full reprieve. You're not putting your energy and attention into something, you're just letting yourself enjoy something and maybe remembering why it is that you create in the first place and what it is that you like about writing. I like to read something by maybe Stephen Bruce or Douglas Adams if I'm wanting something light and whimsical, or Neil Gaiman, someone that's created something that I can just enjoy and relax, and I don't have to think too hard into what it is. And if I'm really tired from working too much, I can just throw on a TV show. And if you're a writer, oftentimes you'll probably see yourself, going through the steps of writing whenever you're consuming something. And that's good, because then your book is operating on a subconscious level and you're able to let your creative mind flourish under those circumstances. Combat writer's block. This is something that is very easy to get hung up on. Oh, I just got writer's block. And a lot of times what you have isn't writer's block, it's a stuck spot. So make sure before you call it writer's block that you visit your outline and make sure that you actually have all of those plot points mapped out. And if you find a spot where your story's gone stagnant because of lack of planning, it's not writer's block, you're just stuck. And all you have to do is fix your outline and you will get back on track. So to combat writer's block, I've got some tips for you. Are you stuck on a particular scene? Skip it. You can put in parentheses, write scene later. I do this to myself and it irritates me during my editing process because I find those scenes and I'm like, great, I missed something. So don't do it too much because you're leaving work to future you. But if it allows you to move on and to finish and write the rest of your story, there's no shame in skipping a scene and coming back to it later. This is something that we learn in elementary school when you're taking a test. You're stuck on that question, skip it. If you have time, you can come back to it. If not, you missed it, and the teacher will get to it later. Of course, in this case, the teacher is either your editor or yourself, so, use that one with caution, but I have used this, and it does work. Take a walk. If you're finding that your creative energy is just stagnant and you're completely unable to write anything, get up out of your seat, walk around the block. Look at things, think about things, consider your scene while you're doing other stuff. Engage your mind, engage your body. Studies actually show that exercise helps to fuel the creative brain. So actually one of the best times to write is right after a workout. I'll have to ask Marvin when he comes back if that's been working for him, because he's been drafting after his morning workout. And so, find something that helps you to engage your physical body and to let your mind wander. And if you can't take a walk because of physical limitations, do something physical, whether it's in knitting or riding a bike or just doing some light exercise on the floor of your apartment. Whatever it is that you have to do to engage your body in some way and let your mind wander. Get some exercise. Fill a short writing prompt. The best thing I think you can do when you're stuck on your story or experiencing writer's block, if you really just feel like you have to keep writing and you can't get out of it by watching something or reading something, pick a writing prompt and put your characters into said prompt. That will help you not only to stay focused on your project, but to maybe learn or discover something else about your characters. Reread a favorite book or read something new. Take a moment to think about the book that got you inspired to start writing. One of my favorite things to revisit is Douglas Adams' So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, or The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. So those are all books that are part of the Hitchhiker's Guide sort of collection. But I like these ones in particular because there is some cohesive plot, but they're light and they're funny and they remind me what you can do with words. Another favorite of mine is the book 500 Years After by Stephen Bruce, and there's a whole series that goes with that, so you can't just jump into that book specifically. But it's my favorite in the series for a number of reasons, and wordplay and the usage of narrative voice and story elements coming together is really one of my favorite things. And that book just reminds me what it is I love about telling stories and about writing. And so find that thing, go back to your roots, rediscover what it is that made you want to write a book in the first place. And oftentimes that unsticks your stuck. Do not repeatedly go back and read what you've already written. This happens all the time, and if you let yourself do this, you are going to get discouraged and you're going to hate what you've written, and the more you look at it, the more that you're going to just feel horrible about it, especially if you are unable to write anything moving forward. You'll start having those negative thoughts. Oh, I'm garbage. Oh, I shouldn't be writing this. Oh, I shouldn't even be working on this. Stop what you're doing. Do not read what you've already written unless you just need a refresher to remember something. Don't go back and see what you've already done. Do not turn around and make edits until the block has passed. This will have the same effect as going back and reading what you've written. You're going to keep changing things and keep on changing things until you're just never happy with what you've already done. And that's why it's important to not make your own edits as you are going forward and as you're going through your first draft. So you've got your draft completed. You've got your first book written. What do you do with it now? Well, I said earlier that the draft is, we feel like it's a step 1, but it's really more of a step 3 when you consider the idea conception and plotting your idea. So however you view it, you've got your draft completed. Now what? It's time to slap it up on Kindle. No, it is not. I see this happen a lot. Authors finish their books and they're like, okay, it's time to publish now. and then they put their rough draft up on the internet for everyone to read. That is quite possibly the worst thing you can do, both for your writing career and for your self-esteem as an author. I promise you that bad reviews are so much worse when you think your book is perfect and it's not. Your first book is the hardest to write. So before you move on and do anything, congratulate yourself for writing that first draft. Because even though you're not done yet, you have just done the hardest part of writing a book, which is completing that first draft. It means something. It's not nothing. You're going to get negative feedback on it. You want some negative feedback so you can see what needs fixed. But don't take it personally and don't take it to heart, because you did something that most people never do despite trying their whole lives. The rough draft will not be perfect. Very likely, it won't even be that good. So when you have written your first book, a lot of authors make the mistake of thinking, I'm done, I love this, I'm gonna change nothing. And if you think that way about your writing, you will never grow and improve as a writer. You may be a pretty decent writer, but you can't be a great writer if you're stagnant and if you're stuck thinking that your book is just the bee's knees. So, take feedback to heart. Be willing to listen to your feedback partners, and we'll go through a few feedback steps as we move forward in this section. But keep in mind, you can love something that is imperfect, and that's okay, and doesn't make your love for what you created any less valid. It's okay to feel protective of your work, but it's important to accept criticism with an open mind. Anytime we're pursuing anything creative, we hopefully have a mentor who can show us when we've gone astray or show us when we've done something right. It's important to listen to what they say and to accept what they've told us. And it doesn't mean that we have to make the suggested changes if they don't serve the story, but you have to be willing to consider, would this serve my story? Would this serve my book? Would this actually improve it? And do that genuinely. Don't do that from obligation or for formality. Genuinely take it to heart and consider it. Feedback is important for helping you grow as a writer. So if you get all that feedback and you go, they just didn't get it. Well, if they didn't get it, you are doing something wrong. If your audience doesn't get your book, it's because you have failed to show them something important within the text. So you have to go back and you have to look at what you've written and consider, what can I do to make my points more clear? What can I do to help my theme to improve? What can I do to help this plot point or this character arc to shine more brilliantly? And so it's really important to get lots of feedback before you publish your book, because that will help you to know what it is that you can do to make your book more accessible. So the big question, self-publish or traditionally publish? A lot of people ask this question. I never really have a straightforward answer because there isn't a straightforward answer. So if you're unfamiliar, traditionally publishing is the course of publishing that mostly gets your books onto bookshelves or gets your books adapted into movies and TV shows. It's the process of getting an agent and then getting a literary press and then getting your book published by a big printing press and distributed countrywide or worldwide or whatever. Self-publishing is a little bit different. It's where you've written your book and now you're finding either a small independent printing press or you're absorbing the cost of printing yourself through something like Amazon. There's a couple other small indie presses out there as well. So there's a couple things that you just have to consider when you're deciding which one of these you want to do. So to traditionally publish, you should consider an outstanding query. So a query is the letter that you write. It's sort of your sales pitch to the agent or to the editor or to the publication company, and it should be outstanding. And there's a lot of information about how to write a good query letter. It's a combination of writing skills and marketing skills. There are editors who can help you come up with a query letter or who can help you refine your query letter. There are blog posts from agents all over the internet about what they might be looking for. A lot of agents will even tell you in their calls for queries what it is they want to see in your query letter. Preparation for rejection. Stephen King received 30 rejections for Carrie before it got published. Imagine being the agent who rejected Stephen King. But he got 30 of them, and we know what a huge successful hit Carrie was when it was finally published. So rejection doesn't mean that you've done something unforgivably wrong. It just means your book is not a fit for that agent or for that publication company. So be prepared for people to tell you no. Stephen King had a nail by his workstation where he hung all of his rejection letters. They were his trophies, they were his battle scars. He kept them as a reminder. And then when you traditionally publish, you do surrender some creative control. A lot of times cover art, editing, all of that stuff, once you have sold your book, will be completely out of your hands. Depending on what you're wanting to do with your book, that can be a good thing or it can be something you want to avoid. When I published my book, I actually wanted to go with self-publishing because I wanted that creative control. But I wasn't looking to sell my book or to reach a huge audience. I was looking to use it as a tool for myself and for my students and my clients. So it depends on what you want to do. Like I said, if you're ready to surrender some of that control because you just got to get your story out there, absolutely go traditional. To self-publish, you should consider impeccable proofreading. I don't know how many books I've seen published by independent or self-published authors, and the first page is riddled with errors. And I don't just mean typos. Even in traditional publishing, there's only about a 95% accuracy rate for catching typos. But there are grammar errors, things that any editor would catch and fix immediately. And it's entirely obvious right off the bat when the person who has self-published their book did not hire an editor or get their book proofread by someone who knows what they are doing. If you're self-publishing, your proofread needs to be impeccable. Sell a fully polished, complete product. Don't sell a car to someone that's only got 3 tires on it. Cover art, summary, and other publication technicals. So when you are creating a book for publication, you will have to put a cover on it. It doesn't matter if it's just a black cover with some white letters on it. It's got to have something. So you can either you can commission covers, which is what I did for my book. You can pay someone to make something for you. You can put something together if you have some graphic skills, or if you are like so many other self-published authors, you can use cover building tools. Sometimes that goes really well. Sometimes it goes really bad. As long as you put in the work and time and really look at it, you're probably fine. Your summary or the blurb on the back of your book, the blurb on your page where you're selling it if you're selling it online. This could be on your website or on your Amazon page or on your Kobo page. Whatever it is, make sure that you have a summary, and again, make sure that it's proofread. I'm not going to buy a book that has errors in the summary. The summary is usually about 40 words long. If you haven't looked at your summary to make sure that it is accurate, I do not trust that you've looked at the rest of your book to do that either. And marketing and distribution. So again, with self-publishing, you are absorbing the cost of your distribution. You're absorbing printing costs or marketing costs, whatever it is. When you self-publish, the only person who's going to be selling your book is you and whoever else you hire to do it for you. When you traditionally publish, there's a team of people. There's a team of marketers, people who have ins with like Barnes & Noble or half-price books, who already know where they're going to distribute your book. So when you self-publish, you have to find all of those things yourself, whether it's individually selling to people or if you are selling your book to a store like Half Price Books. I know like Barnes & Noble doesn't take most independent presses, but there are a lot of bookstores that do. And so you just have to sort of know where you're going to sell your book or who you're going to sell your book to when you go to self-publishing. Any questions?
Do people sometimes start in the self-publishing realm and then you can have something traditionally published from there?
Yes. There's a distinction, and agents will, now it's very common for agents to say either, yes, I'm accepting previously self-published work, or no, I'm not.
Okay.
And it's important to note that the difference, that a rejection for a project is not a rejection for the author, unless you've been insufferable toward the agent and they're just not going to work with you. But an agent saying no to a specific project doesn't mean you can't get them something later. So if you've self-published 10 books and you're ready to take the next step and go into traditional publishing, you can totally do that. You just have to find the right agent. It works the other way too. If you've been traditionally publishing and you want to try your hand at self-publishing, you can do that too. There's not really limitations or like one right way to do it. But yes, to answer your question, you can. The editing process. This is the part that I had to, I think this was the first thing I ever wrote a blog about, was the actual editing process. So once you've got that first draft, there's several more steps that you have to take. And the order and sort of operation of each step will vary based on your project and your experience and what you want to do with your book. But there's a pretty simple formula to sort of give you an idea of what you need to do. So like I said, you have conception, plotting, and your first draft, right? So the next thing to do is your self-edit. And I did talk about that a little bit earlier. When you are ready to, when you're done with your first draft, don't do this while you're drafting. Wait till you're done. When you are done with your first draft, now is the time to take all of your footnotes, all of your ideas, and go back through and integrate them. And as you go, look for your plot holes, look for anything that you wanted to cover in more detail, anything that doesn't quite feel or sound right, and change that, fix that, sort of make the book into more of what you want it to look like. From here, if you're a first-time author, I highly recommend you work with a developmental editor. So this is someone who is going to serve as a sort of critique partner, someone who will read your book and give you detailed feedback on the structure of your book, detailed feedback on your character arcs, on your plot arcs, other things that we covered earlier as well. You know, help you find the theme of your book. What is it that you want your reader to feel or to think when they've finished with your book? And the developmental editor or critique partner can help you identify if you were able to push those things through. And if not, how you can, or how you can strengthen those themes from what you have already written. From the developmental edit comes another self-edit. So when I go through and I perform a developmental edit for an author, it's depending on the length of the book. For an average book, it's probably about 15 pages of feedback. So from the developmental edit, you are probably going to have a lot of revisions to make. And that's why I suggest it as such an early step in the process, because there's probably going to be a lot that you want to refine. There's probably going to be a lot that you want to polish and improve and strengthen. And all of that feedback, it's probably going to take a few weeks to integrate it. But you know, don't be scared of the developmental edit. And just like with any other step of the process, be open to feedback, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it right away. So when you're going through that edit, it's really important to stay in close contact with the person who did the previous step, because they can help you to both understand their feedback and see if you're integrating it in a way that makes sense or that actually helps the story. Then you have the beta read. Sometimes this is the most intimidating part of the process for a lot of authors, and especially new authors. Oh my God, it's my first book. Are they gonna hate it? Is it gonna be horrible? Was it even worth it? Because by this point, you've spent probably 6 or more months working on your book, working on this project. And it can be really scary. And the hard truth is, you're probably gonna hear at least 1 or 2 things that you do not like from the beta read. And it's important to bear in mind that yes, you need to listen, but you don't have to change everything they tell you to change. And there's a difference between this will serve my story and this is how I wish it had gone. A lot of beta readers, and I actually see this very prevalently within critique groups, like writing groups, will tell you to change things based on how they would have done it or what they think should have happened. And sometimes it's hard, especially if you're doing it all virtually. I work with a lot of beta readers online to be able to tell the difference between each of those things. And so when you're working with beta readers, make sure you understand the difference between those two things. And then again, don't be discouraged when you get the feedback that you hate. A lot of times beta readers are not going to tell you anything you didn't already know. This may not be so true for your first book, but by your second or third, you're going to have a pretty good idea of things that they're going to point out. And it's the same with any step in the process. With your editor, with your feedback partners, you're going to probably already know what they're going to say, and sometimes you're going to leave something there just to see, like, well, can I sneak this by? And they'll let you know if it works. Another question I get asked a lot, how many beta readers should I have? No more than 3. And I know authors who use like 15 to 20 beta readers at a time. And I have no idea how they expect to get any helpful information out of so much different feedback. Because with that many beta readers, you are going to get conflicting information. You're likely to get conflicting information from just 2 or 3. And I do recommend you use at least 2. At least 2, no more than 3. But when you have a horde of beta readers, you're picking through a lot of information and a lot of personal bias to try to figure out what works for your book. And there's a very good chance you will end up more confused than enlightened by the end of that process. So keep your group small. Then guess what? You've got another self-edit. How many is that now? 3? So much like with the developmental edit, with the self-edit after the beta read, you're just looking at all the feedback and trying to decide what is going to strengthen your story. Beta readers have an advantage over editors in that ideally they are not in the writing industry. I see a lot of authors exchanging beta reads. It's actually better if you get a beta read from someone who doesn't write, because they're going to have the average audience perspective. Another writer might have that shortcoming of, well, this is how I would have done it, or this is how I would have liked to see it go. Where an audience member who does not write or who does not edit can say, I didn't like that. And from a beta read, that's more the type of feedback that you want. I didn't like that, or I really liked that. I liked this character. I didn't like that character. And it'll be less technical and more emotional. And you can get that sort of reflection of your work from the outside perspective. And then you can go on to your self-edit from there and find better ways to connect with your audience. And it's good as well to follow up with your beta readers and say, so here are the changes I made. How do you feel about that? And then you can see if your changes have made it better or made it worse. After that comes the copy or line edit. There's a gray area, and if you look for editors online, some of them will list one, some of them will list the other, some of them will list them as different services. The line edit is generally understood to be something that is done for style and wordiness. So when you go through and you're trying to emulate Hemingway, that's what the line edit will do. Where can we shrink this down? Where can we cut these words out? How can we make this flow better? How can we make this feel better, sound better? It's still a fairly heavy edit, but because it's more down to the wording of everything, it should be closer to the end of the process, because you're going to have to do that with any new scene that you add or change. You're going to have to go back and make all of those adjustments or those alterations. So it's good to do that after you've got your character arcs perfected, after you've gotten your plot perfected, after you've gotten your scenes down the way that you want them to. Then you can go in and edit for style. Some people do like a proofread type thing at this stage. You can call it copy editing or you can call it proofreading. Again, there's some like gray area in there. I think of proofreading as sort of what you see in the picture here, best way, and then, you know, changing grammar and checking for homophones. And it's really important that your editor knows to check for your homophones, because even me, an editor, sometimes I write the wrong word. I get the wrong plane a lot. And I have confusion with lay versus lie. And so that's something I always have to ask. I have editor friends. I'm like, in this context, which one of these words do I use? So it's good to make sure that your editor knows to check for that stuff. If you have an editor who doesn't do that, don't pay them any money. Don't hire them. And then proofreading, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's something that is vital if you are self-publishing. If you do none of the other things, which I highly recommend you do, at least get a proofreader. And it doesn't have to be an editor that you pay to do it. It can be your cousin who has an English degree. It can be anyone who is able to spot those errors and fix them. Don't do it yourself. Almost guarantee you will not see all your mistakes as a proofreader, even just as a proofreader. And I do know a lot of authors who do all of their own editing. The problem with that, which is the same problem you have with any of your structural editing, you can't see where things don't make sense to other people. You can use some tricks, like reading your book out loud helps you see if things are worded awkwardly. Like recording it, that's one thing that I like to do, is record what I've written and then listen to it and see how that feels. But at the end of the day, the best thing you can do is have a second set of eyes on what you've created. And then the proofread, I cannot proofread my own work. I cannot do it. I can proofread for anyone else. I can spot a mistake. I mean, I think my first day here, I pointed at 2 posters of like, that's the wrong word and that needs a new comma. But my own stuff, totally blind. If you can find it in my book, there's actually a spot where I made an edit and then missed something in the proofread, and there's an extra word that doesn't make any sense there. Of course, I saw it once it was printed and I had 40 copies on my shelf. So it's good to have a second set of eyes as your proofread. Does anybody have any questions?
With the beta read, do you recommend those all being unbiased, unknown people, or would it be okay if like you knew one of the beta readers and they knew some of your work?
That's actually a good question. It depends on the person.
Okay.
And if you trust them to be honest with you. A lot of times people that you know will try to lift you up, which is not a bad thing, but it won't help you to grow. So if it's somebody that you know and you trust them to be honest, if it's someone who has told you, yes, those pants make you look fat, that's probably someone that you can trust for your beta read.
Okay.
Questions? Comments? Metaphysical speculations? All right, well, I think we're a little bit early. Obviously, querying, we talked a little bit about that. That's the last thing that you do. Also, if you are traditionally publishing, you don't necessarily need to proofread, because they will have editors who do that. You don't have to do a line edit. That's more like personal preference. If you're pretty confident with your writing, you can probably skip that step if you're doing traditional, because there's a good chance that they'll have an editor who kind of changes some things anyway. But you don't have to do the proofread if you're going traditional. And then the query, and then if you're not querying, you publish. So you do whatever platform you're publishing on, and you go from there.
Is it just a standard? Because I would think if you're going to traditionally publish, I guess like in my mind, making sure that everything was proofread beforehand, because I would just assume that would be an issue if they caught mistakes like that. Does that not reflect poorly upon you?
It's a very common misconception, actually. What an agent is usually looking for is a good story. They want something they can sell to a publisher. They're not expecting you to have polished work, because publishers, the good thing about traditional publishing is that the press that is publishing absorbs all of the production cost. So it means that you might make less money, but you're absorbing less cost. And so they do editing and cover art and all that stuff. And they have editors. Publishers have editors. Every single one of them. That's part of their process, because they're creating a product that they want to sell. You can have it proofread. There's nothing wrong with having it proofread before you send it to an agent, but it's not something that if it's going to be a burden on you to do it, it's not something that you have to have done. It's not like the developmental or the beta read, which are things that you should definitely have done before you query. That's more technical. So the more technical stuff, they'll usually cover. And if they won't, then they'll tell you, this is what you need to do, and then we'll talk. Something that some agents do is, I forget what the technical term is, but a revise and resend. So they'll request your full manuscript, but only after you've made some changes. So they kind of take on the role of beta reader, where they give you some feedback and say, if you're able to make these changes or to fix these errors and then send it to me and I like what I see, then we can move forward, which is usually what happens before your book is accepted. And you could get a few revise and resend requests and then nothing. And unfortunately, a lot of agents will just not reply to queries. And some of them state that in their, I have a writer's guide with a list of agents in it, or there's websites where you can find them. Some of them will state, we don't reply to rejected queries, and some of them don't state that, but that's still kind of their policy. So it's not unusual to send out 50 queries and get 3 or 4 responses, 3 or 4 no's in response at that. Yeah.
Didn't know that.
It's very common. Were you going to ask something?
Oh, no, that's a little rough, but yeah.
It is a little rough, yeah.
Understandable, at least.
I worked with an author recently who wrote a wonderful, wonderful story. And she counted 78 queries before getting 1 request for a full manuscript. So you send the query letter and then whatever sample pages the agent asks for. And then they'll request a full manuscript and usually give you a yes or no based on that. So it was a lot of no's, a lot of non-responses, and 1 request for a full manuscript. And that's from a story that is objectively fantastic. So something that sort of falls into a more mediocre or mainstream genre or storyline may be more. The days of, 30 rejection letters and then you're sold are back in Stephen King's day. It's even harder to break in now, which is not a bad thing. That means more people are writing and more people are creating excellent stories. It also means it's harder for you to get your story traditionally published. And if you're just eager to get it out there and don't want to wait for an agent, go ahead and self-publish. I don't have anything else. If no one else has any questions, then we'll go ahead and call it a day. I'm going to do my obligatory technical things. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you like this video and subscribe to my channel. And go ahead and check out overhaulmynovel.com, where you can keep up with all of the latest writing news. You can also follow me on Twitter at Meg Trast and follow us on Facebook. Don't forget to like and follow the Better Business Bureau, who have hosted this class for us here today. You can also find them on Facebook, the Better Business Bureau of Kansas City, and follow them on Twitter. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.